I still remember the burning, though not just on my skin. Trust me, that latte was scorching, but the real burn was behind my eyes. The sheer humiliation of standing there soaked while Jessica's flawless red lipstick curved into a smile so smug, I wanted to scream, "Fetch me another one, intern, and try not to ruin the order this time." The entire conference room exploded in laughter. 8 people, most of whom I barely knew, suddenly united in their amusement at my expense. Coffee running down my cream blouse, seeping into my bra. The scent of hazelnut mixed with shame filling my nostrils. I'd been at Blackage Partners for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of being called intern despite being hired as a financial analyst. 3 weeks of Jessica Gordon treating me like her personal assistant rather than a colleague. God, I'm trembling even retelling this. Now, before I continue, if you're watching this, hit subscribe. I promise it gets good. And I really want to know in the comments if you've ever had someone like Jessica in your life. Someone who made you feel tiny just because they could. Anyway, I'm Renata. I'm 34 now, but I was 31 when all this went down. I'm not particularly striking, average height, brown hair. I never quite know what to do with a face people call friendly when they're being polite. I'm the person who brings baked treats to the office and remembers everyone's birthdays. The one who laughs a little too loudly sometimes and apologizes too much. I'd spent most of my career at smaller firms, climbing slowly until my Uncle Leon passed away. He wasn't rich, but he had invested wisely in a few companies over the years. One of those was Blackage. His will left me his entire portfolio, including a 17% stake in Blackage Partners, technically making me the third largest individual shareholder. But here's the thing, nobody at Blackage knew that. When I applied, I used my mother's maiden name. I wanted to see the company from the inside before deciding anything about my inheritance. Were they ethical? Did they treat people well? Was this somewhere I wanted my money invested long-term? Jessica Gordon was giving me my answer, one humiliating coffee splash at a time. She was head of client acquisitions, 38, blonde, immaculate, the kind of woman whose clothes never wrinkle and hair never strays. She wore her power like expensive perfume, too much of it, and always making sure you noticed. That morning, she'd asked me to grab coffee for the pre-meeting. I did it even though it wasn't my job because I was still the newest person, trying to be helpful. She took one sip, scrunched up her face like I'd handed her sewage, and then splashed it right in my face in front of everyone. "Jessica," I said softly, coffee dripping from my chin onto the conference table. "That was completely unnecessary." "Oh my God," she rolled her eyes theatrically. "Learn to take a joke and learn to make a proper coffee." I asked for almond milk. This is clearly oat milk. It wasn't. It was exactly what she'd requested. I knew because I'd triple-checked her order after she'd corrected me twice already. I started to explain, but she cut me off. "God, just go clean yourself up. You look pathetic." She turned to her colleague, Daniel, who was struggling to hide his smirk. "This is why we don't hire from state schools, Daniel. For the record, I have an MBA from Northwestern. Not that it matters." I stood frozen. I've always been the type who thinks of the perfect comeback hours later, staring at my bedroom ceiling. At that moment, all I felt was shame crawling up my neck like fire. Then the door opened. Martin Chen, the CFO, walked in with a manila folder and a concerned look when he saw me standing there, stained and shaking. "What happened here?" he asked, glancing between me and Jessica. "Just a minor accident," Jessica said smoothly. "Our intern is a bit clumsy." Martin frowned slightly, but seemed too distracted to press further. "Well, I have the updated shareholder information for the quarterly review. Jessica, you'll need to include this in your presentation for tomorrow." He passed out copies from his folder. I watched as everyone at the table received their packet. My heart pounded so hard against my ribs I thought it might bruise. This wasn't how I'd planned for my identity to be revealed. But maybe it was perfect timing after all. Martin, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I believe I should have a copy as well. Jessica let out an exasperated sigh. This is confidential financial information. Interns don't get these packets. Actually, Martin said, looking at me more closely. She's right. Miss Caldwell should have a copy. Jessica frowned. Miss who? Her name is Renata Baker. Martin handed me a packet. Baker is her mother's name. Caldwell is her legal surname. The room went silent as everyone scanned the papers until they found the shareholder list. I could pinpoint the exact moment each person noticed my name. Eyes widening, heads snapping up to stare at me. Jessica flipped frantically through her pages. I watched her face drain of color as she found what she was looking for. Renata Caldwell, 17% ownership, she whispered. That's impossible. That would make you the third largest individual shareholder. I finished for her, dabbing coffee from my cheek with the back of my hand. Yes, I said. But you're an intern, she murmured, her voice small now. Actually, Jessica, I said, standing taller despite coffee still dripping from my blouse. I was hired as a financial analyst. And about your contract? The room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning hum. My contract? Her voice cracked slightly. I nodded slowly. Your department falls under shareholder review next month, doesn't it? 5 minutes earlier, I'd been the pathetic, coffee-soaked nobody. Now, every eye in that conference room looked at me differently. Fear, respect, confusion. It was all there. Let me pause for a moment to say something that might sound odd. It didn't feel satisfying. Not really. Have you ever dreamed of something happening, only for it to feel hollow when it finally does? That was exactly it. I'd spent 3 weeks being invisible, being mistreated, gathering intel about the toxic culture Jessica had created in her department. I'd learned that turnover on her team was 78% higher than any other department. I discovered she'd driven away 3 highly qualified candidates because they threatened her position. I'd watched her take credit for other people's work so many times I'd lost count. And now I had the power to act. But power is tricky, right? I should backtrack a bit. My uncle Leon wasn't just some random investor. He'd been on the founding team of Blackage 30 years earlier, back when it was just 3 guys with a business plan working out of a garage. He stayed mostly behind the scenes, but was brilliant with numbers and strategy. When he got sick, he started talking to me about the company, its values, its people. The heart of any business is its people, he told me during one of our last conversations. Not the clients, not the profits, the people who show up every day and choose to give their energy to something bigger than themselves. I'd promised him I'd protect his legacy. That's why I joined as a regular employee instead of striding in as a major shareholder. I needed to see what Blackage had become. And what it had become, at least in Jessica's department, was a place where people were afraid. Where kissing up and kicking down was the fastest path to success. Where someone like Jessica could throw hot coffee at a colleague and expect everyone to laugh. So there I stood, coffee-stained, somehow holding all the cards. I think, I said carefully, this meeting should adjourn for now. I need to change, and I believe we all have some things to process. I turned to Martin. Could you schedule some time for us to speak privately this afternoon? He nodded quickly. Of course, Miss Caldwell. Whenever works for you. Jessica remained frozen, her perfect composure shattered. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. How to twist this, how to rescue her position, how to turn me into an ally instead of a threat. Rana Tada, she said, her voice suddenly warm and syrupy. I'm so sorry about the coffee. It was just a joke that got carried away. Let me take you to lunch today, my treat. We should really get to know each other better. The whiplash of her instant respect made my stomach twist. I have other plans for lunch, I said, but I'll be reviewing the organizational structure of your department this week. We can meet on Friday. I left that conference room with coffee-soaked dignity, but with a very clear purpose. I wasn't going to become the villain of this story. I wasn't going to fire Jessica in some theatrical boardroom spectacle. That's what people would expect. The sweet revenge of the underdog suddenly handed power. But what I wanted wasn't revenge. What I wanted was change. Wait, no, that's a lie. I did want revenge. God, I wanted it so badly. I could taste it, metallic and sweet like blood from biting my cheek. I wanted to watch her squirm. I wanted to see her pack her designer handbags into a cardboard box and walk out with security eyeing her every step. And that was the part of myself I didn't particularly admire, the part Uncle Leon would have hated to see. I went home that day and sat on my bathroom floor still smelling like hazelnut coffee, and I cried. Not because of Jessica, but because I finally understood the weight of what my uncle had given me. Not just shares in a company, but responsibility for people's livelihoods. The power to reshape someone's life with a single decision. I stayed home the next day, told them I needed time to review company materials, which wasn't completely untrue. What I truly needed was space to think about what kind of person I wanted to become, what kind of leader. By Wednesday, rumors were everywhere. Jessica sent me 3 emails, each one more desperate than the last, offering to mentor me, to guide me in leadership, to build a productive partnership. Thursday morning, I walked into Blackage wearing my best blazer and the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she intended to do. Whispers followed me down every hallway. People who'd never acknowledged I existed suddenly knew my name, my coffee order, my favorite lunch place. It was surreal and honestly a bit disgusting. Jessica was waiting outside my tiny cubicle, wearing a smile that never touched her eyes. Renata, I've been trying to reach you. I put together some ideas on departmental improvements I'd love to discuss. I nodded politely. We're still on for tomorrow, Jessica. 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Her smile twitched. Actually, I was hoping we could talk privately, just the 2 of us. That won't be necessary, I said. Everything that needs saying should be on record. I've invited HR to join us. The color drained from her face for the second time that week. HR? But this is just a departmental discussion. We don't need to formalize anything yet. My coffee stains disagree, I said quietly. As I watched her walk away, her heels clicking rapidly like a nervous heartbeat, I felt that tug again, the urge to crush her completely, to make an example of her, to show everyone what happens when you humiliate someone simply because you think you can. I spent that night practicing what I would say, how I'd restructure her department, how I'd address her behavior, whether I would allow her to keep her job. By morning, I knew exactly what I intended to do. And as I stepped into that conference room where my humiliation had begun just 4 days earlier, I realized every set of eyes was on me now. Not with mockery, but with this uneasy mix of fear and respect that made my skin crawl. Jessica was already seated, a thick binder of materials in front of her, hair immaculate, expression perfectly arranged. The HR director, Lucia, sat on my right. Martin chose a seat directly across from Jessica. I placed my coffee cup, from the same cafe as Monday's disaster, deliberately on the table between us. Let's begin, I said. The room felt different this time. 4 days earlier, I had been invisible. Now everyone watched me like I might spontaneously burst into flames or declare world domination. Jessica's eyes kept darting between my face and the coffee cup, like she was calculating the odds of history reversing itself. God, I'd be lying if I said the thought hadn't crossed my mind. Just once, very quickly. Just reach across. But that's not who I am. Even if sometimes I wish it could be. I'd spent the last few days reviewing the structure and performance of the client acquisitions department. I'd spoken with HR about turnover rates, exit interviews, and complaints filed over the past 18 months. Jessica's professionally pleasant smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened around her pen. I continued. I've also reviewed your personal performance metrics, Jessica. Here's where I want to pause and say something important. When you suddenly hold power over someone who's been cruel to you, you learn something about yourself, something that might surprise you. And it isn't always flattering, because in that moment, seeing Jessica's carefully contained panic, feeling the room hold its collective breath, I liked it. I enjoyed watching her squirm. There was a dark, ugly satisfaction spreading through my chest. Part of me even wanted to prolong it, just to watch her suffer a little longer. That's the part of revenge movies don't show, how it can make you feel powerful and terrible at the same time. Your client acquisition numbers are excellent, I continued. You've consistently exceeded targets for bringing in new business. Your presentations to the board have been exemplary. On paper, you're a stellar performer. A flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. Maybe she'd survived the storm. However, I said, opening a folder of my own, your departmental turnover is catastrophic. In the past year alone, 17 employees have left your team. Exit interviews cite the same issues repeatedly. I looked directly at her. Bullying, taking credit for others' work, creating a hostile work environment, threatening job security if people don't comply with demands outside their roles. Jessica's mask slipped for a moment before she recovered. With all due respect, Miss Caldwell, high-performance environments aren't for everyone. I push my team because excellence requires pressure. Martin shifted uncomfortably. Jessica has always delivered results. At what cost? I asked quietly. The company has spent over $300,000 in recruitment and training just to replace people who couldn't tolerate working with you. That's not counting institutional knowledge lost or clients frustrated by constantly seeing new faces. I took a deliberate sip of coffee. And then there's how you treat people you perceive as beneath you, like throwing hot coffee at a colleague because you could. That was a joke that went too far, Jessica said quickly. I've already apologized for that. Actually, you haven't, I replied. You offered lunch and mentorship only after realizing I hold significant power over your career. That's not an apology. That's self-preservation. Lucia from HR cleared her throat. We have documentation of 7 incidents over the past year that qualify as workplace harassment, all involving Miss Gordon. Jessica's perfect composure finally cracked. This is absurd. I've been with Blackage for 9 years. I've brought in millions in new business, and you're going to let some nepotism case destroy my career over hurt feelings? The room fell silent. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see if I'd explode. If this was going to turn into the corporate equivalent of a hair-pulling catfight. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of the games. Tired of the posturing. Tired of people like Jessica thinking cruelty is a leadership strategy. No one's destroying your career, Jessica, I said calmly. You're being offered a choice. I slid a document across the table. Option 1, accept a lateral move to our research division. Same salary, different responsibilities, no direct reports, 6-month probationary period with regular HR check-ins regarding professional conduct. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the paperwork. Option 2 is in the second folder, I continued. It details the severance package if you choose to leave Blackage. You can't just demote me, her voice rose sharply. I've earned my position. Your position includes managing people, I said, and you've demonstrated repeatedly that you're either unwilling or unable to do that ethically. She turned to Martin, desperation evident. You can't seriously be considering this, I finished for her. My client relationships will be handled by capable team members who already do most of the work anyway. According to their own statements, Jessica's face flushed red. You have no idea what it takes to succeed in this industry. I've had to be twice as tough, twice as aggressive as any man to get where I am. And now you want to punish me for not being nice enough. Her words hit something raw inside me, because in some twisted way I understood. Women in finance walk a brutal tightrope. Too soft, and you're ineffective. Too hard, and you're feared. I'd spent years tiptoeing that line myself. This isn't about being nice, I said quietly. This is about basic human decency, about not terrorizing your team, about not throwing hot coffee at someone because they used the wrong milk. She flinched at that. You have until Monday to decide, I continued. Take the weekend to consider your options. Jessica stood abruptly, gathering her papers with trembling hands. My attorney will be in touch, she snapped, striding toward the door, though we all heard the tremor in her voice. After she left, Martin turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That was handled differently than I expected, he said. How did you expect me to handle it? I asked. He shrugged. Honestly, I thought you'd fire her on the spot. Most people would have, given what she did to you. I nodded slowly, considering it. Lucia looked relieved. I think the approach you've taken shows real leadership. Firing her outright could have caused legal issues. Not to mention, it might have looked personally motivated. It would have been personally motivated, I admitted. That's exactly why I didn't do it. When the meeting ended, I returned to my cubicle, the same tiny space I'd occupied before everyone knew who I really was. I sat for a long time, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Had I been too harsh, not harsh enough? Should I have just transferred to another department and avoided the mess entirely? I expected to feel triumphant. I'd confronted my bully. I'd held her accountable. I'd used my power responsibly, even when the temptation to do otherwise had been strong. Instead, I felt complicated, messy, human. By Monday morning, the office buzzed with rumors. Jessica hadn't been seen. Her office door remained closed. People found excuses to walk past my desk, hoping for gossip I wouldn't give. At 9:15, Lucia from HR called. Jessica's made her decision. She'd like to meet with both of us at 10 o'clock. My stomach nodded. I'd spent the weekend swinging between guilt and righteous anger, second-guessing myself, and remembering how it felt to stand there dripping with coffee while an entire room laughed. Jessica was already in the conference room when we arrived. Her makeup flawless, as always, but there was a stillness about her that hadn't been there before. She looked up as I entered. I've decided to accept the transfer to research. I nodded, relieved in a way I hadn't expected. I think that's a wise choice. Not because I agree with your assessment, she added quickly, but because I've invested too much in this company to walk away. Lucia pushed the paperwork across the table. We'll need to go through the terms again to make sure everything's clear. As Jessica signed her name line after line, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a quiet certainty that this was necessary, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been made to feel small in her presence. When we finished, Jessica looked at me directly for the first time since entering the room. You know, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I thought you were weak that first day, standing there with coffee dripping down your face, not fighting back. I thought you were pathetic. I said nothing, waiting. I wonder if you'll still be the nice, smiling Renata a year from now, she continued. Power changes people. Usually, not for the better. Maybe, I acknowledged, but treating people with basic respect isn't about being nice, it's about being human. She gathered her things and stood. Good luck with that philosophy. This industry will eat you alive. After she left, Lucia exhaled heavily. Well, that could have gone worse. I smiled thinly. The day is still young. The next few weeks were a strange adjustment period. The client acquisitions team was reorganized. I moved into a proper office. My role expanded to include consulting on major financial decisions, fitting my shareholder status. People stopped calling me intern and started saying Miss Caldwell. I missed being invisible sometimes, missed the clarity of being underestimated. Jessica and I avoided each other successfully for nearly a month. When we did pass in hallways, she'd nod stiffly. I'd nod back, and we'd continue in opposite directions. office politics at its most basic. Then came the Anderson account presentation, a major potential client, one Jessica had cultivated for months before her transfer. I'd been asked to join the pitch meeting because of my financial expertise. We found ourselves in the same conference room where she'd thrown coffee at me, the first time we'd been back there together since that day. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Jessica presented her research flawlessly. I handled the financial projections. We worked like professional strangers, neither acknowledging our past. The client seemed impressed, asking thoughtful questions that we answered in careful tandem. Afterward, as everyone filed out, I lingered to gather my notes. So did Jessica. The silence stretched between us like a taut rope. "Nice work in there," I finally said, because someone had to break it. She looked at me searchingly. "You didn't have to give me credit for the initial client contact. You could have claimed that for yourself." I shrugged. "It was your work. I don't take credit for what I didn't do. Unlike me." The question carried an edge, but also a hint of genuine curiosity. I didn't answer. She sighed, smoothing her already perfect hair. "The research division isn't as terrible as I expected. It's quieter. I can focus on the work instead of managing personalities." "That's good," I said, unsure where the conversation was going. Jessica gathered her folders deliberately. "I'm not going to apologize again or pretend we're friends, but I respect that you could have destroyed me, and you didn't." "That was never my goal, was it?" She looked at me sharply. "Not even for a moment." I considered lying, then decided against it. "For a moment, yes. Several moments, actually. But revenge fantasies are different from actions." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Well, anyway, thank you for not throwing coffee at me today. I wouldn't have shown the same restraint." And with that, she walked out. I stayed seated long after she left, turning our conversation over in my mind. It wasn't forgiveness, not from either side. It wasn't even closure. It was just a moment of honest acknowledgement between two complicated women with complicated feelings. In the months that followed, Blackage changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually. I used my position to implement stronger anti-bullying policies. Exit interviews became mandatory. Anonymous feedback channels were created so employees could report concerns without fear of retaliation. Jessica remained in research and, by all accounts, excelled. We kept our professional distance, though occasionally I caught her watching me in meetings, an expression I couldn't quite interpret: curiosity, resentment, or something else entirely. When people ask me now about the coffee incident, and yes, it became legendary enough to earn that title, I usually just smile and change the subject. Not because I'm embarrassed or regret how I handled things, it's because the story isn't really about coffee, or contracts, or corporate power plays. It's about what happens when we suddenly have power over someone who's hurt us. About the thin line between justice and vengeance. About realizing that even cruel people can be more complicated than they first appear. Sometimes at company events, Jessica and I end up in the same conversation circle. There's always a moment of recognition, that shared memory of coffee splashing, humiliation, and power shifting. We make brief eye contact, acknowledging it silently. Then we return to discussing quarterly projections or market trends. Two professional women, once at opposite ends of a power dynamic, now existing in the complicated middle ground of mutual respect without friendship. I never did get coffee for anyone else at Blackage. Small victories, right? So that's my story. Not a fairy tale revenge where the villain is spectacularly destroyed and everyone cheers. Not a perfect resolution where former enemies become best friends. Just a messy human situation where I tried to do the right thing, even when part of me wanted the satisfying thing instead. If you've ever been in a position where someone treated you like nothing, only to later realize you held power they never suspected, I hope my story helps somehow. There's no perfect way to handle it, no guidebook for navigating that bizarre emotional terrain. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be when the tables turn, and hope that choice is one you can live with long after the satisfaction of revenge has faded. If you liked this story, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments if you've ever faced a choice between revenge and something more complicated. And if Jessica happens to be watching this, the coffee shop on Ninth still makes that hazelnut latte, just saying.